Israel is accused of repeatedly violating the Lebanon ceasefire deal, which is wild because the ceasefire deal has only been in place for like 3-4 days, but they've already been accused of violating it. Today, reporters tried once again to get a straight answer from Matthew Miller, who is a State Department spokesman, about what the United States is doing and what Israel is doing with regard to this ceasefire. Now, you'll be shocked once again, to know that the U.S. State Department wasn't giving any straight answers on this. Watch this exchange, y'all.
Yeah. Can I ask you a little bit more background on the side letter that the U.S. sent to Israel regarding the ceasefire arrangement with Hezbollah and Israel? What does it allow Israel to do?
Look, I don't have anything more I can speak to about the ceasefire agreement, but I will say that a lot of the reporting around the ceasefire agreement tends to treat as news that Israel can exercise what ultimately is a right that every country has. Every country has the right to defend itself against terrorist attacks. Israel has that right. Lebanon has that right. Every country in the world has that right. And they have that right under international law.
But the United States often characterizes Israeli attacks as defense. France says that Israel has violated the ceasefire 52 times at this point. But if they're just recouched as Israel defending itself, is Israel allowed to continue to attack Hezbollah as long as it says that was self-defense, that was self-defense?
Look, as I said in response to questions earlier, we have a mechanism that we have set up to look at these exact questions and to look at reports of ceasefire violations and to determine whether, in fact, they were violations of the ceasefire, whether, in fact, if an incident was in some way justified because somebody had come under the threat of harm. And I'm not going to make those judgments from here before that group has the opportunity to work through these questions. That's why we set it up in the first place, so it could do so in a diligent way, and that's what they're going to do. But that said, we believe that it is in the interest of Israel and Lebanon that this ceasefire hold. Remember, if you look at it from Israel's perspective, the 70,000 Israeli citizens that have been forced from their homes don't get to return home if the ceasefire collapses. So it is very much in Israel's interest to see the ceasefire hold, and we're going to continue to press them to adhere to it.
Would there be any additional consequences from the U.S. if Israel was determined through this mechanism to have broken the ceasefire?
I'm just not going to get into hypotheticals from here. Go ahead, and we'll.
I'm just not going to get into hypotheticals from here. Woo! First of all, shout out to Ryan Grimm. Ryan is a veteran reporter who I absolutely love. Good friend. We worked together at HuffPost back in our baby journalist days. And he's just grown and grown and grown and continued to be just an extraordinary reporter. And part of what makes Ryan extraordinary is that he asks tough questions and he doesn't flinch. And the State Department does everything it can to avoid giving you a direct answer about everything. First thing, France has said that Israel has violated the ceasefire 52 times. That can't be lost on us. 52 times. And despite violating it 52 times, nothing happens. And of course, the State Department says, well, everybody has a right to defend itself. True. No one disagrees that Israel has a right to defend itself. The problem is Israel considers everything self-defense. Even when it started, Israel considers striking first preemptive self-defense. That was the argument since the 1967 war. So it's very challenging, frustrating even to sometimes see these exchanges because the U.S. State Department has absolutely no interest, absolutely no investment, no willingness to hold Israel accountable for anything, including a ceasefire deal with Lebanon that's only 3 or 4 days old, depending on where you are in the world right now. And so then Ryan pushes him more and says, well, how do you know it's really self-defense and not Israel just doing what it do? And he said, well, we have a mechanism to look at these questions. Do you? We ain't seen it yet. What is the mechanism, sir? Matthew, what is the mechanism, Matthew Miller? And if you have one, why has it never proven that Israel is violating the law? Now, you would say, a Zionist or just a defender of Israel would say, because maybe Israel's always doing it right. No country always does it right. And yet the United States has never found Israel to do anything wrong. It is shocking, stunning that this is, in fact, the case. So then Ryan takes it to the final point here and says, well, what if you do? What happens when you do find Israel doing something? They said, well, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. That's the kind of answer that you give to people who are not smart. That makes you look like you're smart or being prudent or reasonable. It's not a hypothetical. I mean, it's a hypothetical in the most literal of senses. But listen to me, every state has to prepare itself for hypotheticals. That's what laws are. Hey, Mark, what do we do if someone robs a bank? Well, we arrest them. What penalty do you get for robbing a bank? Well, you get 5 years minimum for the gun charge. Federal banks have a mandatory guiding. There's a sentencing guideline of X, Y, and Z. Blah, 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 blah. Right? Imagine asking a police officer or a district attorney, "What's the penalty for armed robbery in our state?" And he goes, "We're not going to deal in hypotheticals. We're going to make up the laws after we catch somebody." That's silly. The question here is, United States, what are you willing to do if you catch Israel violating the law? And they don't want to answer that because they don't want to be accountable. It's an obvious thing. So, as we continue to cover Lebanon, and we will continue to cover it, and our brother Afif will be back here hopefully in a few days to break it down some more for us. Please understand that in addition to the extraordinary amount of violence, thousands of people already dead, more than 3,000, closer to 4,000 now, along more than 15,000 people injured in Lebanon. There's also the idea that, once again, the provocation happens. Then when people respond to the provocation, the person who does the provoking goes, look at what they're doing. Violence, violence, violence. We, as a global community, have to keep our eyes on all of these sites around the world. We have to watch who's initiating violence and who's responding to violence. We have to ask who is engaged in righteous self-defense and who is being a colonial occupier, who's being an imperialist dictator, who's being a repressive Western, power monger or hegemon. And we got to ask all these questions and then answer them. Because if we wait for the State Department, the U.S. State Department to give us answers, it's always going to be crazy. And once again, Israel absolutely has the right to defend itself. You can't listen to any U.S. State Department talker and not hear that. You can't listen to Kamala Harris or Joe Biden and not hear that. They all say that. It is like a verbal tick. Israel has a right to defend itself. No one is disputing that. What's in dispute is the conditions under which Israel has a right to defend itself. And not just Israel. Israel has the same rights to defend itself as other nations. It does not have more right to defend itself or more conditions under which it can, quote unquote, defend itself. For example, Israel does not have a right to defend itself in occupied territory. Israel does not have a right to defend itself inside of areas that it occupies. Y'all heard me again? Israel does not have a right to defend itself in territories that it occupies. So you can't be in the West Bank like, oh, we had a right to defend ourselves. But the State Department has echoed that for decades, uncritically, because saying that someone has a right to defend themselves sounds natural. It sounds reasonable. It sounds intuitive. Again, it seems axiomatic. And it is axiomatic under the right circumstances. Otherwise, it is not. And when I say axiomatic, I simply mean self-evidently true. Self-evidently true.